Deep in the shadowed folds of the Appalachian hills, where the ancient ridges claw at the sky like the spines of forgotten beasts, the Hawthorne family had endured for 7 generations, their blood a tangled web of secrets and decay. The mist clung to the valleys like a shroud, muffling the cries of twisted creatures that prowled the underbrush, and the wind whispered through the pines with voices that no sane ear should heed. It began, as such things often do, with a stranger's unwitting intrusion, a young scholar named Elias Crow, burdened with maps and crumbling tomes, seeking the roots of a lineage long erased from civilized memory. He had heard the rumors in the dim taverns of distant towns, a clan so reclusive that the mountains themselves seemed to guard their domain, their features warped by an inheritance that defied the natural order, eyes gleaming with a feral light that hinted at horrors bred in isolation. As Elias ascended the overgrown path, the air grew heavy, laced with the metallic tang of earth disturbed by unnatural forces. The homestead loomed ahead, a sagging edifice of weathered timber and moss-eaten stone, its windows like hollow sockets staring into the void. From within came the low murmur of voices, rhythmic and incantatory, as if the house itself breathed with a life of its own. He knocked, and the door creaked open to reveal matriarch Hawthorne, her skin pallid and stretched over bones that seemed too sharp, too elongated, her gaze piercing through him with the weight of inherited madness. "You've come for the blood," she rasped, her words slithering like roots through soil. "But the blood claims its own." In that moment, Elias felt the first chill of the curse's grasp, a subtle unraveling at the edges of his perception, where shadows danced in patterns that mocked the laws of light. The family gathered in the flickering lamplight, their forms a grotesque tableau, children with fused fingers clutching at skirts, elders whose whispers carried echoes of voices not their own. They spoke of the progenitor, old Ezekiel Hawthorne, who 7 generations past had delved too deep into the caverns beneath the hills, unearthing something that slumbered in the primordial dark, a presence that seeped into his veins, twisting his seed into a vessel for its eternal hunger. Each generation had borne the mark deeper, their unions confined to the bloodline to preserve the pact, lest the entity awaken fully and devour the world above. Yet as the night deepened, Elias sensed the fragility in their vigil, the subtle tremors in their hands, the averted eyes that betrayed a terror of what stirred within. The curse was not merely affliction, it was a living chain, binding them to a fate where every birth heralded greater aberration, every death a temporary reprieve from the inexorable pull toward dissolution. And in the silence between their tales, he heard it, a distant rumbling from the earth, as if the mountains themselves groaned under the weight of secrets too vast for mortal comprehension. In the dim, dust-choked archives of a small university library in Charleston, West Virginia, Elias Crow first encountered the faint trace of the Hawthorne name. It appeared not in any prominent ledger or family Bible, but in the margins of a forgotten 19th-century surveyor's journal, scribbled beside a crude map of the remote southern Appalachian ridges. The note was cryptic: Hawthorne clan avoid. Blood wrong. Life too long. Beneath it, someone had later added, in a different hand, 7 generations and counting. Elias, a genealogist in his mid-30s with a quiet obsession for vanished lineages, felt an immediate pull. He had spent years chasing the ghosts of families erased by war, migration, or deliberate obscurity, but this was different. The Hawthornes had not vanished, they had simply withdrawn, folding themselves into the hollows where even the hardiest revenue agents feared to tread. Whispers persisted in the surrounding counties, tales of a family that never sought doctors, never attended church outside their own circle, never allowed outsiders to court their daughters or sons. Children born to them were said to carry strange marks, eyes too pale, fingers slightly webbed, an unnatural resilience to illness that bordered on the uncanny. Over weeks of meticulous research, Elias pieced together fragments from land deeds, census records that abruptly ceased after 1890, and oral histories collected by folklorists in the 1930s. The family had arrived in the region shortly after the Revolutionary War, led by Ezekiel Hawthorne, a man described in one yellowed letter as touched by something in the deep caves. From that point forward, marriages occurred only within the extended kin network, cousins wedding cousins, uncles taking nieces when no closer match remained. The outside world was kept at bay by geography, suspicion, and, if rumors were to be believed, something far more sinister. What fascinated Elias most was the reported longevity. Birth and death dates, when they could be found at all, suggested individuals living well beyond a century, some approaching 150 years, with no explanation beyond the closed circle of their blood. Photographs did not exist, or if they once had, they had been destroyed. The few outsiders who claimed to have seen the Hawthorns spoke of faces that seemed both young and ancient, skin smooth yet etched with faint, unnatural patterns like veins of quartz beneath the surface. Driven by a compulsion he could not fully name, Elias gathered his maps, his recorder, his notebooks filled with questions. He told colleagues he was documenting isolated Appalachian kinships, a harmless academic pursuit. But in quiet moments, staring at the surveyor's warning scrawled in faded ink, he felt the first stirrings of unease, a sense that some lines of inquiry were meant to remain buried, some bloodlines left undisturbed in the dark folds of the mountains. Elias Crow left the last paved road behind just after dawn, his rented truck laboring up a gravel track that narrowed into little more than a scar on the mountainside. The higher he climbed, the denser the forest became, laurels and rhododendrons crowding the path until branches scraped the doors like insistent fingers. By midday, the sky had vanished under a low ceiling of cloud, and mist began to rise from the hollows, cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet stone and decaying leaves. The air thickened with each mile, pressing against his skin, as if the mountains themselves resented the intrusion of an outsider. The path, little more than a deer trail now, wound upward through switchbacks choked with ferns and fallen timber. Elias walked the final stretch, backpack heavy with notebooks and a recorder he already doubted he would dare to use openly. Sounds grew muted, even his footfalls seemed swallowed by the sodden earth. Occasionally, a raven's croak echoed from the ridges, sharp and accusatory, then silence rushed back in. At last the ground leveled into a narrow bench on the hillside, and there it was, the Hawthorne homestead. It squatted in a small clearing that the forest seemed perpetually on the verge of reclaiming, vines snaking over split-rail fences long collapsed into ruin. The main house was a rambling structure of hand-hewn logs darkened by centuries of smoke and rain, its roof sagging under patches of moss thick as turf. Chimneys leaned at precarious angles, and the porch boards had rotted through in places, revealing black voids beneath. Outbuildings, barns, smokehouses, a springhouse hunched nearby, their tin roofs rusted the color of dried blood, doors hanging open on leather hinges that creaked faintly in the breeze. As Elias drew closer, the mist seemed to gather purposefully around the place, curling through the yard like smoke from an unseen fire. The windows were small and deeply set, glazed with grime that turned them opaque, yet he felt watched from within. A metallic tang sharpened the air, not quite rust, not quite blood, mingling with the pervasive odor of earth recently turned, though no fresh dirt was visible. Shapes moved behind the clouded glass, slow, deliberate silhouettes that paused when he paused, as if mirroring his hesitation. He saw them then, the first unmistakable signs. A child peered from the corner of the porch, pale face framed by lank hair, fingers pressed against the rail, fingers that joined too far down, webbed like a frog's. An old woman in the doorway tilted her head at an angle no neck should allow, her eyes catching what little light penetrated the gloom and reflecting it back with an unnatural gleam. Their features carried the subtle distortions of shed blood repeated too many times, elongated limbs, skin stretched thin over prominent bones, mouths a fraction too wide. The homestead did not merely stand in decay, it exuded a quiet, patient malevolence, as though the wood and stone had absorbed generations of whispered secrets and now breathed them out in slow exhalations that chilled the soul. Elias felt the weight of unseen eyes from every shadowed corner, and the mist closed tighter, erasing the path behind him. Night fell swiftly in the hollow, the mist thickening into a palpable veil that pressed against the homestead's walls like a living thing. Inside the main room, a single oil lamp cast trembling shadows across the rough-hewn beams, its flame guttering as if fearful of what it might reveal. The family had gathered Elias around a hearth where logs smoldered more than burned, exhaling smoke that carried the faint, acrid bite of herbs not found in any mortal garden. They moved with a deliberate slowness, limbs angular and joints clicking softly, seating themselves on benches worn smooth by generations of the same blood. At the head sat matriarch Hawthorne Abigail, though no one dared use the name lightly, her body frail yet unbowed, spine curved like the ancient ridges outside. Her hair hung in silver strands that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, and her eyes, milky with age yet sharp as obsidian shards, fixed on Elias with an intensity that made the air between them hum. The others deferred to her without word, children huddling close to mothers whose faces mirrored their own in subtle, unsettling ways. She began to speak after a silence that stretched until Elias felt it coiling in his chest. Her voice was low, rasping like dry leaves skittering over stone, each word measured as if drawn from a well deeper than memory. It was Ezekiel, she said, their progenitor, who had first heard the call. 7 generations back, in the time when the hills were wilder and men ventured into the earth for saltpeter and secrets. He had followed forgotten shafts beneath the highest ridge, descending further than any before him, until the stone itself gave way to something older, caverns where light had never touched, where the air thrummed with a presence that was not sound but knowing. There, in the absolute dark, Ezekiel had encountered it, an entity vast and formless, slumbering in the roots of the world, older than the mountains that cradled it. It offered power, not gold or dominion, but endurance, insight into the hidden veins of existence, a life stretched beyond natural span. In exchange, only fealty, that his bloodline remain pure, uncontaminated by the world above, a closed circle to nurture its influence. He had agreed, cutting his palm and letting the blood fall into a fissure that drank it greedily. From that moment, the pact was sealed, the curse woven into their very marrow. Abigail's gnarled fingers traced patterns in the ash on the hearth as she spoke, patterns that twisted unnaturally, echoing shapes Elias glimpsed in the flickering flames, shapes that hurt to perceive directly. Each generation, she continued, had paid the price in flesh and mind, the inbreeding necessary to keep the entity's essence concentrated, preventing its dilution or escape. Longevity came, yes, but at the cost of slow malformation, of dreams that bled into waking hours, of children born with the mark deepening. The family listened in rapt silence, some nodding faintly, others staring into the fire with expressions of mingled reverence and dread. Abigail leaned forward, her breath stirring the lamp flame, and for an instant Elias saw something shift behind her eyes, a ripple, as if another intelligence peered out, ancient and patient, assessing the newcomer. Unable to sleep in the oppressive quiet of the guest room, a cramped alcove smelling of mildew and old herbs, Elias rose long after midnight, drawn by a low, rhythmic chanting that seeped through the floorboards like water through cracks. The sound was not loud, yet it vibrated in his bones, pulling him toward the back of the homestead where a door led out into the clearing behind the house. The moon hung low and bloated, its light filtered through the ever-present mist into a sickly pallor that turned the world monochrome and unreal. The family had assembled in a rough circle around a flat stone sunk into the earth, its surface etched with spirals and symbols worn smooth by centuries of touch. They stood barefoot on the cold ground, robes of undyed wool hanging loose on their elongated frames, faces tilted upward as if drinking from an invisible source. Abigail presided at the stone's center, her arms raised, palms open to the sky, while the others swayed in unison, their voices blending into a cadence older than language, syllables that twisted the tongue and made the air shimmer. Shadows behaved wrongly here. Instead of lying flat beneath the moonlight, they writhed and stretched, elongating into impossible shapes that detached from their owners and slithered across the ground like smoke given will. Elias watched from the doorway, breath caught, as tendrils of darkness rose to meet the family's outstretched hands, coiling around wrists and throats in an intimate, almost caressing embrace. Where the shadows touched skin, faint luminescence bloomed, veins glowing beneath the surface like rivers of pale fire, illuminating the subtle shifts occurring within. A young boy no older than 10 stepped forward, guided by an elder's hand, his eyes wide and unblinking. As the shadows enveloped him, his body convulsed gently, bones creaking as they lengthened imperceptibly, fingers fusing further at the tips while new ridges formed along his spine. He did not cry out, instead, a serene acceptance settled over his features, as though the pain were a sacred communion. Others followed, each receiving the touch in turn, their dormant mutations stirring to life, eyes dilating to absorb more of the scant light, skin taking on a faint iridescence, mouths widening to accommodate emerging ridges of cartilage. The entity did not manifest fully, yet its presence pressed down, warping reality at the edges. Trees bent inward as if bowing, mist swirling into vortices that revealed glimpses of vast, impossible geometries beneath the soil. Elias felt it probing at his mind, a cold curiosity testing the barriers of his thoughts, whispering promises of knowledge in exchange for surrender. The chanting rose in intensity, shadows twisting faster, drawing strength from the bloodline's concentrated essence, awakening what had slumbered in their veins for another cycled on the third night, when the house had settled into its deepest silence and the mist outside pressed like a shroud against the windows. Elias was awakened by a soft scraping at his door. He opened it to find a figure huddled in the shadows, a young woman no more than 20, her face a pale oval framed by tangled dark hair, eyes wide with a feverish intensity that spoke of sleepless torment. This was Lila Hawthorne, one of the quieter members of the clan, often seen lingering at the edges of gatherings, her fingers twisting nervously in her apron as if fighting an invisible restraint. She slipped inside without a word, closing the door with exquisite care, then pressed a trembling finger to her lips. Her skin carried the familiar pallor and subtle distortions of her kin, cheekbones a touch too prominent, neck elongated, but in her expression burned something fiercer, a raw desperation that bordered on madness. "They'll kill me if they know," she whispered, voice barely audible, cracking like thin ice. "But I can't bear it anymore. The dreams, the changes, it's worse each time." Elias watched as she glanced fearfully toward the wall separating his room from the main house, then knelt on the floorboards, prying at a loose plank with nails bitten to the quick. Beneath lay a hollow space, dusty and forgotten, where several leather-bound volumes had been concealed, their covers cracked and stained by years of damp. She pulled one out reverently, almost fearfully, and thrust it toward him. "Grandfather's first," she breathed. "And others after. They wrote what Abigail won't say aloud, the truth of what we feed, what it takes." As Elias opened the diary by the faint moonlight filtering through the cracks, pages yellowed and brittle revealed handwriting that grew increasingly erratic across generations, meticulous entries giving way to frantic scrawls, sketches of writhing forms and symbols that hurt the eyes. They chronicled the escalating horrors, the births of children with extra joints, the nights when the entity demanded more than blood, the slow erosion of humanity as the curse deepened with each inbred union. Lila hovered close, her breath ragged, pointing to passages that described failed attempts to break the pact, relatives who tried to flee only to be drawn back by visions or worse. "I've seen you watching," she continued, voice gaining urgency. "You're not like the others who came before, curious but blind. You might understand. Help me end it." Her hands clutched at his sleeve, nails digging in, eyes pleading in the dim light. In aiding him, she betrayed the unbreakable law of the bloodline, risking the wrath of Abigail and the entity both, driven by a torment that had festered through years of witnessing her family's descent into something no longer wholly human. The diaries, passed down in secret by those who quietly rebelled, now lay open between them, their words a map to the heart of the curse. The storm arrived without warning on the fifth night, a fury that seemed conjured from the depths rather than the sky. Winds howled through the ridges like damned souls, tearing at the homestead's shingles and rattling the bones of the old house. Rain lashed sideways in sheets, turning the clearing into a quagmire, while lightning fractured the darkness in blinding strobes that revealed the mountain's jagged teeth. Thunder rolled not above but through the earth itself, a deep subterranean growl that vibrated in the chest and set the oil lamps flickering wildly. Elias and Lila huddled in the main room with the family, the air thick with tension and the sharp ozone scent carried on the gale. Abigail stood at the window, unmoving, her silhouette etched against each flash as if she welcomed the tumult. Then came the first rupture, a tremendous crack as an ancient oak atop the slope uprooted, its roots clawing up clods of earth that tumbled down toward the homestead. In its wake, the soil eroded swiftly under the deluge, exposing layers long hidden, pale stones etched with spiraling glyphs that glowed faintly in the lightning's glare, fragments of bone blackened by time, and metallic shards that hummed when touched by rain. As the ground continued to give way, more relics surfaced from the entity's buried domain, slabs inscribed with warnings in a script that predated human tongue, crystalline formations pulsing with inner light, and remnants of offerings long calcified. The family stared in transfixed horror, some dropping to their knees in the mud to retrieve the items reverently, others recoiling as if burned. The storm's fury seemed directed, focused on unearthing these forbidden pieces, awakening echoes of the pact's origin. With each thunderclap, visions assaulted them all, shared hallucinations bleeding from the unearthed relics into their minds. Elias saw flashes of past atrocities, generations of hawthorns bound in ritual sacrifice, bodies contorted in agony as the entity fed, children born only to be marked deeper, failed escapes ending in madness and return. Screams from centuries past echoed in the wind, faces of the long dead pleading through the rain. The curse responded violently to the disturbance, amplifying the family's inbred afflictions into grotesque transformations. Skin split and reformed with iridescent scales, limbs elongated with audible snaps, eyes bulging to capture the storm's erratic light. Abigail's form hunched further, her voice joining the thunder in ancient invocation, while younger members writhed on the ground, their bodies rebelling against the surge of parasitic essence now unbound. The relics lay scattered in the mud, gleaming wetly, as the storm raged on, drawing the entity's hunger closer to the surface. Dawn after the storm brought no relief, only a thinner mist that clung to the hollows like a fever dream refusing to break. Elias, diaries clutched in his pack and Lila's whispered directions burning in his mind, slipped from the homestead while the family still slumbered in exhausted vigil. The path downward seemed clear at first, the ravaged earth from the night's fury marking a trail he thought he recognized. But as he descended, the forest closed in, trees leaning at unnatural angles, their branches interlacing overhead to filter the weak light into fractured patterns that danced mockingly on the ground. Hours blurred into a labyrinth of deception, what appeared as the main trail looped back upon itself, depositing him at the edge of the clearing time and again, the homestead reappearing like a malignant growth he could not excise. Illusions wove tighter, the family's web of shared delusion, amplified by the entity's stirring. Voices echoed from the mist, familiar yet warped, his own mother's call from childhood, Lila pleading for him to return, Abigail's rasp promising truths if he only turned back. Shadows detached from trunks, forming silhouettes of elongated figures that mirrored the hawthorn's deformities, beckoning with fused fingers or tilting heads at impossible angles. Panic rising, Elias ran, branches whipping his face, roots snaring his feet as if the earth itself conspired. The mist thickened deliberately, distorting distance and direction until up became down, the ridge path dissolving into sheer drops that hadn't existed before. He stumbled into clearings where the family waited, unmoving, their eyes reflecting the entity's ancient gaze, yet when he blinked they vanished, only to reappear closer. Exhaustion forced him to confront the truth. Escape was not merely physical but a battle against the influence seeping into his mind. Nightmares bled into waking, the shared visions of the bloodline now invading his thoughts, showing him futures where he joined their circle, his own features slowly twisting. The entity manifested not as form but through them, whispers in the wind promising belonging in exchange for surrender, its power rooted in the pact's isolation now extending tendrils to claim fresh blood. Elias collapsed against a boulder, the homestead's dim outline visible once more through the fog, as grotesque figures emerged from the trees, their movements synchronized in a silent, inexorable advance. Forced back to the homestead by the unrelenting illusions, Elias confronted Abigail in the dim heart of the house. The unearthed relics scattered across the table like accusations from the earth. Lila stood nearby, trembling, her betrayal now exposed by the entity's stirring whispers that echoed in every family member's gaze. Abigail's eyes, ancient and depthless, fixed on him as she revealed the final truth, her voice a dry rustle that carried the weight of centuries. The curse was never genetic in the way mortals understood, not a flaw of blood but a deliberate infestation, a parasitic essence grafted onto Ezekiel's soul in that primordial cavern. The entity was no mere demon or spirit, it was a fragment of something vast and incomprehensible, a guardian of cosmic secrets buried beneath the hills, knowledge of realities that overlapped and devoured, gates to voids where time and form dissolved. It had chosen the hawthorns as vessels, ensuring its vigilance by binding to their lineage, the inbreeding a ritual to concentrate its hold, preventing dilution that might allow it to spread unchecked or awaken fully. Each generation fed it unwittingly, their sanity eroding as the parasite burrowed deeper, twisting flesh to better host its influence, granting longevity only to prolong the torment. Births strengthened it, deaths merely transferred the burden, the closed bloodline a cage that contained its hunger while sustaining its watch over the hidden fissure, a seal against an intrusion far worse than itself. Abigail spoke of visions granted to the faithful, glimpses of stars that screamed, of worlds consumed by the entity's kin, the hills chosen because their ancient bones resonated with the old vibrations. The deformations, the madness, the unnatural endurance, all symptoms of the essence devouring from within, reshaping hosts into approximations of its true nature. Outsiders were rare threats, drawn only to be assessed, corrupted, or eliminated if they neared the secret. Elias felt it now, probing his thoughts since his arrival, tasting his curiosity as potential nourishment. The family watched in silence, some with envy at his untainted mind, others with the hollow resignation of those already hollowed out. The revelation hung in the air like the mist outside, inescapable and suffocating, the entity's patient presence pulsing through their veins. The revelation shattered what fragile unity remained among the Hawthorns, the entities stirring amplifying old fractures into open warfare within the bloodline. Abigail, voice rising in ecstatic fervor, declared the time of peaking had come, the unearthed relics and Elias's intrusion signaling the need for ultimate sacrifice to appease and empower their guardian. She called for Lila first, the betrayer, her eyes gleaming with fanatical zeal as tendrils of shadow coiled eagerly around her form, elongating her shadow into something vast and hungry. Some family members surged forward in agreement, their mutations flaring as the parasite rewarded devotion, skin rippling with new patterns, limbs strengthening with unnatural vigor. Elders who had long accepted their role chanted in unison, dragging younger kin toward the central stone where blood must flow anew to seal the pact stronger. They saw redemption not in escape but in total surrender, believing full awakening would transcend their tormented flesh, merging them with the eternal watcher below. Others recoiled, horror breaking through generations of conditioning, Lila chief among them, screaming defiance as she clutched at Elias, pleading for him to reveal a way out from the diary's hidden margins. A handful of cousins and siblings joined her, their faces contorted in agony as they fought the entity's pull, nails raking at their own skin to tear free of the invading essence. Fists flew in the cramped space, bodies slamming against walls that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the conflict, the air thick with cries of accusation and pain. The schism erupted into chaos, devoted seizing the hesitant, blades drawn from hidden sheaths for ritual cuts that would bind or end. Blood spattered the floorboards, feeding the shadows that grew bolder, lashing out to punish resistance while cradling the faithful. Elias stood amid the fray, diaries scattered, as family turned on family with a savagery born of terror and exaltation, the curse peaking in this moment of division, forcing each to choose between embracing the call for sacrifice or grasping at fleeting, agonizing hope through the outsider's forbidden knowledge. The homestead echoed with the sounds of unraveling kinship, the mist outside pressing closer as if to witness the bloodline's final fracture. In the homestead's central room, now a maelstrom of violence and despair, the family's schism reached its apocalyptic crescendo, bodies strewn across the blood-slicked floorboards amid shattered relics that pulsed with unholy light. Abigail lay fallen, her ancient form crumpled yet still whispering invocations, shadows writhing from her wounds like escaping smoke. The devoted had been overwhelmed by the resistors' frantic fury, blades turned back upon them in desperate reversal, but victory tasted of ash. Mutations raged unchecked, flesh splitting and reforming in grotesque parodies of evolution as the unbound entity lashed out in rage. Elias stood at the heart of the carnage, the diary's final pages clutched in trembling hands, their ink-blurred instructions revealing the fragile right to sever the pact, a conflation of blood and fire, the destruction of every marked vessel to starve the parasite before it could leap to new hosts. Lila, gashed and weakening, pressed against him, her eyes pleading for release even as the essence clawed deeper into her veins, elongating her fingers further, darkening her gaze with borrowed antiquity. Yet the taint had reached Elias too subtle at first, a warmth in his blood from cuts sustained in the fray, the entity's opportunistic infection seeping through shared fluids in the chaos. Visions assaulted him, futures of solitude broken by union with survivors, children born to carry the watch forward into an 8th generation, his own features slowly twisting to match the family's, longevity granted as the secret remained guarded. The pull was seductive, promising understanding of the cosmic vastness he had only glimpsed, an end to mortal fragility. Around him, the remaining Hawthorns, few now, broken and bleeding, watched with dying breaths, some cursing him as destroyer, others begging for the mercy of oblivion. The homestead groaned, timbers splitting as subterranean rumbles grew, the fissure below awakening to the blood spilled above. Elias felt the choice crystallizing in his tainted veins, ignite the oil lamps and relics, burn the house and all within to break the cycle utterly, or yield, sparing the last vessels and binding himself to the eternal vigil, perpetuating the curse under the indifferent stars. The entity's presence coiled tighter, patient yet insistent, as shadows lengthened into impossible geometries across the walls.